I run a research group which focuses almost exclusively on open source software engineering. So you've probably seen this slogan, software is eating the world. What's meant by that is some form or another. So it's super important to understand how the software industry influences your own products and your own industry if it's not the software industry. We previously heard how open source empowers sharing, how it brings out the best in people. My talk is different. I will focus exclusively on economics. I take, if you will, a hard-nosed perspective on this, how things are working out from an economic perspective and what it means in particular for industries or countries that are not leaders in the IT industry. For my examples, I will have to simplify. Imagine you're producing a product or a service which has and for that simplification, there's exactly one component, external component you need, a software component. And then you add to that your own product or service. So here, for example, if you're a taxi driver, you're providing a ride. That's the service you're providing to your customers. But with Uber, there's the facilitation of finding that customer. So there's a software component provided by Uber, a service you depend on, and then there's the service you provide. If you're selling TVs, there's a lot of software in the TVs. You may think you're manufacturing the hardware, but you really only have a superior product if the software is right as well. So it's always the combination of a component that's being supplied to you, on which you depend, and then something you add to it to make your whole product. Now, what about pricing and who makes what money? It really depends on the power of the different component in your product. If the software component you depend on is provided to you by a monopolist, they will keep raising their prices until you sell at cost, meaning your revenues match your costs and there will be no profits left for you. All the profit goes to the provider of that component, software component that you depend on. The taxi drivers are clearly seeing that, as Uber, for example, is in a strong position. Maybe with the TVs, it's not quite like that yet. So if you are facing a monopolist in your supply chain, if you need a software component to provide your product or service to a market, and you're dependent on that software component, and it's owned by a monopolist, you're not in a good position. It's a bit better if there are alternatives, but if these are closed source software alternatives, you're still locked in to that component in a way that you have to stay with that one supplier or face high switching costs, so that vendor lock-in gives that software supplier a strong negotiation position to raise their prices or keep their prices high as well. So no surprise here, the countries who do this game, who are best at this game, is the United States. Most of the rich software companies who benefit from these situations, and in particular strong monopolies or near monopolies, are American companies. And so it's an important game to understand and play, again, because software will be in every product and every service. Now, the interesting thing historically is that those who suffered this problem first was the software industry itself. Software is also built from components, and the first obvious monopoly of relevance here, or near monopoly, was Microsoft Windows. So at the expense of Intel and Hewlett-Packard and SAP and Oracle, Microsoft was earning superior profits in the market. In return, it's only the software industry, interestingly, the software industry invented a method of fighting against these monopolies by adopting open source practices. So after IBM's OS2 failed, an attempt to provide a competing operating system to Microsoft Windows, these companies realized no single company alone can fight Microsoft, and they joined forces to support the development of Linux. Linux, as an operating system, has become a viable alternative to Windows. Not only did they join forces, they did so in a structured way, which is the main message of my talk today. They did so in a structured way by setting up an open source foundation, which is a place of good governance that ensures as conflict-free as possible collaboration towards a joint goal, with the consequence of the output being community open source software. So the software industry experienced this tool or method of fighting back monopolists in the 90s by setting up Linux against Windows or setting up the Linux Foundation against Microsoft. They repeated that play in the early 2000s when Microsoft again was about to dominate the developer tools market, and the developer tools and developer mindset is at the root of much application success. So that was an important market. And they did, and IBM led it this time, and they succeeded by creating the Eclipse Foundation in opposition to Microsoft and Microsoft's Visual Studio. It happened a third time recently. This time, more recently, it's not Microsoft any longer who's the bad guy, but rather it's Amazon Web Services. So the industry came together and created the OpenStack Foundation to fight back the budding monopoly of Amazon Web Services, who is setting out to rule the world. Somehow this tool here doesn't like my button pressing. Okay, so back. So open source is obviously behind that. The question is, how do you do it? Most people focus on the legal aspects, how software becomes open source software that has an open source license, which ignores the other important part, which is open source is also a collaboration process. Open source has not only invented these interesting licenses, it also has invented a way of how to collaboratively develop software and be successful at that. Developing software and succeeding is really hard. IBM failed at creating an operating system to compete with Windows. The open source world succeeded where IBM, a well-established, well-working company, failed. So the open source collaboration model is a way of getting to successful software. Not always, but much more likely than if you just start with nothing. So open source is not only a license or a legal tool, it's also a collaboration process. And for these companies of the software industry still, in order to throw their resources together and compete with the potential monopolists they wanted to fight, they needed more than just licenses and a way of collaboration. They needed an organization. They needed a structure with governance, a structure where you could settle conflicts of interest, a structure that could fiscally accept donations, that could channel sponsorship, that could channel money in a clean and correct way. So they needed to create a non-profit organization called Open Source Foundations here. The Linux Foundation is an example. The Eclipse Foundation, OpenStack, and many others are all examples of open source foundations. The purpose of an open source foundation is to sponsor, manage, and possibly also develop the software of interest to the members of that organization. The economic benefits I mentioned in the beginning already are now a bit more structured perhaps. If you are able to replace a component owned by a monopolist in your product or solution by a cheaper open source alternative, you free up what's called you free up parts of the wallet of your customers. you can acquire a larger share of wallet of what your customer has money to spend on, meaning you can potentially have higher profits because there are added revenues that will accrue to you and not to the monopolist in your product components. The second, there are other benefits. For example, if you can lower the total cost of a product. In software, at least, there's a lot of price discrimination possible. You can customize your products in such a way that you can charge different customers different prices. And as a consequence, with this added pricing power or lower cost leading to higher pricing power, you can actually reach more price-sensitive customers. You simply increase the number of customers you can pay to. Not at the profit as the old customer, at the same profit, but still at a profit. And finally, you can increase the total addressable market size that of the market you're selling into, because if everyone builds on those components, in particular if they are platforms, then you will simply have more customers be compatible with that. If you move your data center if you get more people to use Linux and have the data centers run on Linux, and you sell into Linux shops, then this way you can address your total market size. Now, to explain what happened historically, how the software industry invented a way of fighting monopolists and preventing the flow of all profits to them, I focus on the software industry. There's nothing that restricts this to software. In fact, we have seen over the last 10, 15 years the rise of open source foundations driven by users of software. The three examples I gave you so far, the Linux Foundation, Eclipse, OpenStack, are vendor-led or, on the left side, developer foundations, meaning these are managed, motivated, run by the software industry itself. Software companies are fighting back a monopolist from their own. Now, there are today examples coming up in the next slide. Open source foundations created by companies in very different businesses, in healthcare, in energy, in automotive, with the goal of sponsoring and managing the development of the software they need in the form of open source software. I call them user-led foundations, meaning the users are leading the foundation. They're also paying for it, but they're leading the strategy and what the requirements and what the features of the software are in order to meet their own needs. There's a further differentiation. Some of these user foundations only sponsor, meaning they only pay. Some are also engaged in the actual development, meaning some of these companies, for example, the automotive companies, some of the railway companies in Germany, they actually have development capabilities. So they have developers, they don't only pay money, they also invest by having developer resources contribute to the open source projects. So I want to look now at user-led open source foundations, where users are in the driver's seat and are determining what the software is supposed to do because they pay for it. So my first example is the Kuali Foundation. This is a US nonprofit organization which develops the software that American universities need for their operation. So think course management, student management, fundraising, HR, etc., all of that. Their business is not software. These are universities. Their business is education. But there's no way of performing their business without good software. So they created Kuali a long time ago, 15, 16 years. And the universities are leading it, so it's user-led. They are also actually developing. Universities often have developers on staff, so they're also contributing to the actual software development. A second example here is OpenMDM. That's the automotive industry. OpenMDM stands for Open Measurement Data Management. If you're producing a car, a lot of test data is being created that shows your car was manufactured to exacting standards, fulfills all kinds of requirements, regulatory requirements, etc. So Audi, BMW, Mercedes, and other car companies decided that the software for that is not that they can purchase in the market, is not what they want. They wanted their own open source software because it fulfills their needs better. So they are leading the development, they are paying for it. And in this case, interestingly, even though they could, they're actually not participating in the actual development. They're only sponsoring the software development. Here an interesting twist is that the automotive suppliers, for reasons or concerns about liability, decided not to own the intellectual property that's being created, but rather leave the copyright with the consulting companies that they sponsor for the development of the open source software. A third example is a consortium, or an open source foundation that I helped create called Open Consequence. These are the local energy network, local energy distributors in Germany who manage the last kilometer of electricity and gas to your home. And they needed software for the smart grid, were not satisfied with closed source solutions, and decided to join forces and collaboratively develop the software for the smart grid that they need. So it's user-led. The energy companies pay for it. In this case, the energy companies, even though they employ a lot of engineers, it's not software developers, so they also don't develop the software themselves. So here we have 3 examples of industries, higher education, automotive, and energy, where the companies in these industries were so dissatisfied with the closed source software they could purchase that they decided the world would be a much better place for them if they joined forces and collaboratively sponsored the development of the open source software they need. Now, that's easier said than done. Let me first still explain the benefits or explain why this went the open source way. First of all, rather than just doing open source, you wanted the foundation to have a place to regulate any conflicts you might have, all of that. You simply wanted good governance. Otherwise, the CEOs of these companies would not pay for the development. You needed a structure, a governance body that regulated the interests and made sure it's open and fair and transparent to all parties. Open source foundations have the benefit of making things more long-lived, because now there's a legal body and you don't depend on individual people any longer. You also don't want a traditional consortium, because open source gives you ready blueprints that are much more likely to succeed than if your lawyers draw up their own solutions, etc. Open source licenses are not fully approved in court, but are much further along and are much more likely to be understood and have clear implications for everyone than a license your lawyers might invent. Same thing with the bylaws and governance rules, open source foundations. There are plenty of those that already exist. They will give you very clear rules that have been proved times and over in existing foundations. If you decided to draw up your completely own rules, the likelihood that there are problems with that is simply much higher than if you follow an open source foundation blueprint. So all of that has the purpose of making something that is hard, successfully developing software, much more likely to succeed. That's why you use the open source foundation blueprint. So I'm staying at the surface, if you will. There's a lot to say. We do a lot of research on how these open source user foundations can possibly work. Let me spend 2 more slides on that, though. The best perspective I have found of explaining it is that the purpose of an open source user foundation from the perspective of the users who create it, the members who set it up, is that they want to create their own ecosystem of suppliers playing by rules set up through the foundations. So you want to structure your ecosystem of suppliers rather than facing some suppliers who make their own rules. This is possible if you actually set up the open source foundation, if you create community open source that has no barriers to using it and providing products and services on top of it. It also means commercially that the members, and that is sometimes hard to swallow at first, that the members of the open source foundation who join in order to help get the software they need pay twice. First, they support or they sponsor the development of community open source software, but that software out of necessity is the same to everyone in the industry. There is nothing competitively differentiating because it's open source software, it's community, and so nobody gets a particular added commercial benefit as a user. You can only specialize or customize or get dedicated services for this community open source software if you pay a particular company then to provide that software to you in some consumable way to you as a service or as a packaged product. So you sponsor, you have to accept that you sponsor the development of the community open source, and that you also pay some company, usually, unless you have strong IT capabilities in-house, that you usually also pay for the provision of that a product or a service built on top of that community open source as you actually make it work for your organization. The key insight is that the combination of supporting community open source and paying for a final product, that the sum of these two costs is much lower than if you simply pay some closed source software company in the short term and in the long term. Because you avoid vendor lock-in, you avoid that component you depend on becomes a monopolist, etc. So I had to cut out anything I wanted to do specifically about the industries of highest interest here, I guess, since I need to close. But in our research, we found many aspects when it works well and when it may be challenging. So, for example, if we are working with the GIZ, some German charity, which is trying to help developing countries acquire software for single-payer healthcare systems. The problem is here, there's a country that's a user. So the number of users is limited. So what do? So it's not companies, for example, now that need to join forces, but this charity is trying to get countries to join forces to develop single-payer healthcare insurance software for the countries, and so forth. Right, I think I need to finish here. So summarizing, an open source foundation helps you manage your dependency on components. In particular, will it help you avoid a monopolist who will eat up all your own profits, making you produce and sell at zero profit, basically just scraping by. If you're not from the software industry, that's particularly important because software, as we saw, is eating up everything from inside. So interestingly enough, by using open source, you can take a lot of profit out of the software industry. It's a very interesting way of fighting back the budding dominance of software as a whole, but you need to acquire the abilities to at least manage a user foundation and manage the development of the software that you're interested in, that you need for your products to be competitive in the markets. I have some recommendations for public policy. I'm always very hopeful, but the main observation is that there's simply a lot of education to be done because companies still often don't realize their dependency on software and don't realize that they need to be active. They cannot be waiting passive. If software is that important component of your product, but you think you are producing cars and not software that rolls around on wheels, then you have to think again. You need to build up these abilities and face the software industry. And so that's a lot of education that countries can do, all the way to making it easier to establish specific user foundations that will address these particular issues for a particular country or company and industry within a country. All right, I'm at the end of my 30 minutes. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
نشكر الأستاذ الفاضل الدكتور ديريك ريلي على كلمته القيمة. الخطوات الأساسية للتعامل الآمن مع البيانات وسبل التعاون من أجل ذلك، هذا هو عنوان المحاضرة التالية التي يلقيها الفاضل فرانك كارلتشيك، المدير الإداري والمؤسس لشركة NextCloud.
The next step for secure data handling and collaboration. This is the title of the third keynote talk to be given by Mr. Frank Karliczek, Managing Director and Founder of NextCloud.
Thank you. Let me see the slides. Yes. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's really great to be here. I'm really happy to see so many people here interested in this topic. Actually, I'm so impressed that I really have to take a photo. I hope that's okay with you. Thanks a lot. So my name is Frank Karliczek. I'm an open source developer for a long, long time, for over 20 years. I was involved in a lot of different projects. I founded different initiatives and companies. I'm a member of the W3C as an invited expert, and I'm here as the founder of NextCloud. So I want to talk about this term, this thesis. This is something you might have seen online. Data is the new oil. This is an interesting claim. What does it mean? It basically means that oil is basically the raw material of the old economy, right? This is where basically the foundation, where a lot of innovation industry is building on top of. Basically, you all know that the whole world depends on oil, and obviously you know it here in Oman because you produce a lot of oil. And the theory here is that data is the new oil. Basically, data is the raw material where a lot of innovation and products and the next industry revolution is basically built on top of. And this is something I think is true, and let me explain why I think this is true. First of all, you see the immense growth of data. So this is the data that's produced in the world. It's a prognosis that goes up to 2020. But if you look at 2019, which we have obviously now, and you compare this to, let's say, 2010, just a few years ago, I mean, this is just super tiny here. And you see how this growth basically accelerated exponentially. So this is the amount of data that's produced like all the time. So what data is this? This is just a rough overview I found. There's, for example, emails. It seems that we are writing 168 million emails per minute. This is a lot. There's a ton of raw data, unstructured data generated. There are Google searches, there are instant messages. So this is just a huge amount of data that's produced all the time. This is a chart that shows the Internet of Things. development. I mean, as you all know, in the old days, we all had more or less one computer, or even before that, maybe not even one computer, but nowadays we have many, many computers. We have a smartphone, and our car is a computer, our TV is a computer, and so on. Because in the future, everything is a computer. Internet of Things basically means everything is a computer, everything is connected, and everything generates data. And we have to understand everything that's connected to the network generates some kind of data. So the amount of data that's generated is just huge, and it's growing like crazy. So where is all this data stored? Is it like stored locally on my smart light bulb or on my smartphone? No, of course not. The data is stored in the cloud. Right? There's the cloud as a central storage where all the data is stored and also processed and analyzed and so on. So what is the cloud? Where does this term even come from? I did a little bit of research, and it seems it's actually quite old. It comes from the 90s. The people from, the one of you who are as old as I am might remember like old diagrams like that. This is something you could produce in the 90s with Microsoft PowerPoint. Very pretty. You had like a fax machine and a computer and everything connected to each other quite nicely, quite old, of course. And then on the left-hand side, you saw this cloud. There's this cloud thing here, which basically means in this diagram, well, there is more connected to all my devices, but it's not really part of this diagram. I don't really know what it is. It's not really my responsibility. It's somewhere else, but there's definitely a line. There's definitely a connection. So it is part of the infrastructure, but it's not really my business. It's not, I don't plan it. It's somewhere else. And if you look at like a data center, you have something similar, right? You have servers and switches and cables, and everything is blended quite nicely. But then, of course, you have the cloud, this cloud thing here, which means this is the rest. This is other stuff that I don't know, that I don't understand. It's not really my business, but it definitely exists. And I think this nice cloud shape, this was actually a standard clip out of Microsoft PowerPoint. And this is my theory why this term cloud, where this comes from. Of course, nowadays, the world looks a little bit different. So nowadays, the cloud is a lot more, and our infrastructure on the right-hand side is just tiny, because there's so much more data in the cloud, the applications run in the cloud, everything is in the cloud. The cloud is the computer, basically. Like our infrastructure, local infrastructure on the right-hand side is just a little bit of small devices, like thin clients, smartphones, smartwatches, smart TVs, but the real calculation, the real storage of data happens in the cloud. Okay, so I did a little bit of research where this cloud actually is. Where is all this data stored? Because we all know that in the old times, the oil basically was produced like from countries like Oman and other well-known countries. But where is this cloud? Where is this new oil stored? Where is it produced? Where is it controlled? Where does it come from? Right? We all know the countries on the world where oil is produced, but where is this data thing produced and stored? So I took a world map and I basically marked all the places where the data is stored and controlled. And luckily, I was very fast with this diagram, because it basically looks like that. Right? So you have here the Silicon Valley, obviously in the US. This is like where Google and Facebook and Dropbox are. A little bit north is then Microsoft and Amazon. But this is basically the world where this new oil, this new data, this new raw material, where the next industrial revolution comes from, where this is like owned and stored and processed. Okay? So I think this is not optimal. Right? I think this can be better. I really think that this should be more distributed. This should be more companies, more countries should have access to that. It shouldn't be controlled by a single entity. It really should be distributed, and it should be federated. And this is something we want to not solve, but at least try to improve a little bit with NextCloud. So what is NextCloud? What's the special thing about NextCloud? First of all, it is not like other cloud services, like Dropbox or Office 365 or Google, because it is not a service, it is a software. Right? So NextCloud isn't a service where you can register. NextCloud is a software. And what's special about it is that, of course, you can run wherever you want. Right? You can download Nextcloud from our website, and you can deploy it wherever you want, and then have your own cloud, your own data center, your own infrastructure wherever you want. Right? Basically, you have to decentralize the whole cloud infrastructure. You no longer depend purely on Google Cloud or Amazon AWS or what Microsoft is doing. You can basically have your own infrastructure and your own local control over your own data, over your destiny, and you have the foundation of the next industrial revolution in your hands. And it's, of course, open source. And there are other products which are only partly open source. We are 100% open source, which means you can take the software and you can do everything you want with it. You can deploy it, you can improve it, you can redistribute it. I already heard in a conversation earlier that there's already a nice service provider who's sponsoring this conference, who's offering Nextcloud. We haven't even met before, like there's a coffee break, right? But they're deploying Nextcloud and using Nextcloud. That's the power of open source, right? You don't even have to talk to us, you don't have to pay us. You just take it and you basically do what you want with it, and you can basically build something up locally here in Oman without a dependency to these big companies in the US. So what is Nextcloud? Nextcloud is, by its core, an enterprise file sync and share solution, which means you have your data like in your Nextcloud, and you can access it from all your devices, Mac, Windows, Linux, iOS, Android, websites, and so on. I usually use this slide, which I like a little bit more, because it basically shows the history of this product category. I see the file server as the grandpa of this market, right? This is a classic thing that came from the 80s and 90s. You have a network share and you can store your files and other people can read the files from there. But this only has very limited functionality. The extension of that is file sync and share, which has additional features. You have mobile access, you have a website, you have versioning, you have encryption, you have like public share links and a lot of other things. But from my perspective, this is only the beginning, because at the end of the day, we're talking about collaboration software. And I'm really happy that others agree with me. So this is a slide I used for many years, but this year, like Gartner renamed their enterprise file sync and share market to collaboration platform market. So they basically agree here. So the future is collaboration software, and this is what we do. You can think about it like Office 365 or G Suite from Google, or the iWork or iCloud stuff from Apple, something like that. So now I have a little bit of a few product slides. I will go over it relatively quickly because I have limited time, but maybe you get an overview what Nextcloud can do. So this is the main web interface. It's basically a file manager. You can upload and download your files. You can drag and drop them. You can share them. You can version them, and so on. Obviously, we also have clients. So on the left-hand side, you see the Android client for Android phones. In the middle, you might think this is the iOS client. It's actually not. We have an iOS client, but this is the native files app from iOS, where we have an integration. As you can see, there's iCloud, and down to it there's Nextcloud. So we have deep integration into iOS. Every application can load and save data into Nextcloud. And on the right-hand side, this is a desktop client which exists for Mac, Windows, and Linux, where you can synchronize folders between your local disk and your cloud server. Obviously, we have a lot of ways to actually look at files. This is a PDF viewer, which is built in. If you upload your photos, then there's automatically a photo gallery generated. You can actually share them with your friends and family. You don't need to upload your photos to Facebook or to Google Photos to share it with your family. You can actually do this directly from inside your Nextcloud. Authentication is very important. So for security, we support all kinds of authentication methods, LDAP, Active Directory, SAML, OAuth, but also two-factor authentication via hardware tokens and other things. So it's actually very, very secure. Another interesting concept is federation, because as I explained earlier, you can take Nextcloud and deploy it on some machine you have, from a Raspberry Pi, very small, up to a big cluster in your university, your company, or your government. And then you have your own Nextcloud for your users. but of course you only can work with the people on this instance. But we actually have a feature called federation where you can share with people on different servers. It works very similar like email. Let's say you have an email server and I have an email server. Someone is at Gmail, someone has an email address from the university, but we can all send each other emails. That's the same thing here with Nextcloud with federation where you can share with other people. We can also consolidate data. So if you have data already existing in your organization, like a Samba share or SharePoint or some FTP or Dropbox or some other storage, you can all mount this into your Nextcloud, and Nextcloud is the data access portal for all your data, which makes it also very secure. We have a full text search, of course. You can actually type in on your phone, on your web interface, and can find all the documents that contain these words. We have workflow capabilities where you can automatically run scripts if certain events happen. It's quite useful in companies to automate workflows and processes. There's a very interesting feature called a file access control. As an administrator, you can actually define rules. Something like a user in the marketing LDAP group can only download a file from the type Word on a Saturday from the IP address from China from an iOS device only after approval or something. You can really generate this kind of rules and you can actually really protect your data. End-to-end encryption is a very powerful feature that's very new, which is also enterprise ready, so we have key management built in. Then this is another interesting topic because I mentioned earlier the Nextcloud can run on very small devices but also very big devices. So a small Raspberry Pi for 2-3 users, a Linux server for 1,000 users, a cluster for 10,000 users, or maybe like 100,000 users. But luckily or unluckily, we have the challenge that we have customers for up to 20 million users. So our biggest customer we have is running Nextcloud for 20 million users. And for 20 million users, you don't want to run them in one database, in one hosting center anymore. So the requirement is to have this run over different hosting centers distributed all over the world. And there we have this global scale architecture where you can actually distribute like different users over different hosting centers over different clusters, but they all behave as one service, one centralized service. It feels like Dropbox or Google or whatever, but it's actually distributed all over the world. We have groupware capabilities like calendar, contacts, and email, of course. Project management, a Kanban board. It's very popular, actually. There's an Outlook plugin where you can take an attachment, put it into an email, and if you send the email, the attachment is automatically uploaded to Nextcloud. A link share is generated and put into the email. It's very popular. Another feature is Nextcloud Talk for communication, where we have this nice group chats that you might know from Slack or from other companies, or Microsoft Teams does the same. Of course, again, here, completely open source and self-hosted, where you have different channels, you can communicate with other people, and we also have iOS and Android apps where we have the same on the phone. And of course, you can press a button and turn this into a video call. So this is basically something like Skype for Business or Google Hangouts, but 100% running on your infrastructure, running on your machine with your user accounts. No bit leaves your country or your organization if you don't want to, but you have the same user experience, like a full messenger, a full video and voice communication feature. We can do collaborative editing of documents, similar to Google Docs or Office 365. You can also then invite other people here. You can see on the right side in the bar, you can invite other people and say, hey, I need some help with this Word file, and just jump in, and you have a second cursor running through the same document. It also works with spreadsheets and presentations, of course. And you can also have in the sidebar a chat and a video call with the people who are editing the same document together with you. This is something where I'm especially proud, because open source sometimes has the tendency to follow back the commercial software world. So in a lot of cases, the open source world is like copying or following the proprietary world. They're looking at what Google is doing or Microsoft is doing. But this is actually something new. If you look at what Microsoft Office 365 is doing, they have Skype for Business, yes, but it runs on a completely different window. It's not really integrated into the editor, and the chat is the same. So this is something no one else can do. I'm actually happy that an open source can also innovate here. And there's a lot more. There's an app store with a lot more extensions where you can look around, and there's a lot more plugins that you can use. And again, everything on your machine, everything open source, and everything, free to use. So the summary, again, I think I said it a few times already, but what we are doing is we are building the same user experience and features that you know from Office 365 or from Google Suite, but you can host it wherever you want. It is always compliant. I mean, no other software can just say we are compliant, because it always depends on what you mean with compliance. But we can really say it because you can run it where you want and how you want. You can look inside the software. You can change the software. We are basically the only solution that can adapt to any regulation and to any compliance rules that exist, because it is on-premise and because it is open source. And no foreign laws are involved. This is a big discussion in Europe at the moment, where even if you're buying a service from an American company, even if it's hosted in Europe, still American laws apply. This is a big discussion in Europe at the moment. Obviously, with us, this is not a problem here. 100% open source, no vendor login, and if you need help with your bigger deployment or with security fixes or with scalability or custom development, obviously we as a company can also help you. Okay, thanks a lot, and I don't know if you have time for questions. Thanks.
الشكر الجزيل للمتحدث الرسمي الفاضل فرانك كارلتشيك. ندعو الآن الدكتور قاسم المعمري من كلية العلوم التطبيقية في صحار ليدير مشكوراً الجلسة النقاشية الأولى مع الفاضل جيل غرافيير والأستاذ ديريك ريلي والفاضل فرانك كارلتشيك.
Many thanks for the speakers for their informative talks. Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Qasim Al-Ma'mari from Applied Science College at Sohar to moderate the first panel discussion with Mr. Gilles Gravier, Professor Derek Rayleigh, and Mr. Frank Karliczek.
خلاص هذا مشتغل. هذا شغال.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for attending. I'd like also to thank the organizers to give me the opportunity to moderate this session. Definitely the talks were enlightening. Thanks to the speakers here. And we're going to continue on the discussion for another 30 minutes. I'd like to give a note to the audience that the organizers are expecting you to post your questions to the websites posted here. We're not going to accept anything directly from the floor, only through this application. The first question that I have here is that actually came through. This application is for Professor Dirk, and this was posted by Mr. Ahmed. Do you think that collaborative software development between giant IT companies could stop IP war if FOSS IP model is adapted or adopted?
Thank you for the question. I think it already has. So if you look at companies like IBM, SAP, and Oracle, who collaborate to develop the software for the infrastructure of the internet as part of the Apache Software Foundation, you can see how they can collaborate. They've learned to collaborate. And as part of this, and also the Linux Foundation, they have set up mechanisms to deal with, for example, patent issues by way of patent innovation networks and agreements not to sue each other. So the desire to collaborate actually lets them put aside many of the potential feuds they might have with each other. Not always, not under all circumstances. These are still for-profit companies, but actually when it comes to open source, they want to, and they're honestly interested in collaboration, they will put those struggles aside usually.
Thank you, Professor. I actually saw that your title was Professor of Open Source, and I was probably wondering, how could you become a professor of open source? How could someone become a professor of open source?
Okay,
this is for us in academia, and maybe for the students as well.
That's a particular idiosyncrasy of the German system. I'm simply a professor at a German university, professor of computer science. Somehow professors in Germany get a more specific title. And I do software engineering, but we already have a professor of software engineering. So okay. I more or less got to choose the next best thing, or maybe the even better thing, and we just invented it. And the good thing is, yes, it's unique. Great marketing.
It's a very good upgrade as well, I think. Thank you. The next question is for Frank, and this came from Khalil. Do you think that the next fight for FOSS advocates is no more software but data? And do you think also that GDPR is a solution to this?
That's a big question. GDPR is a step in a direction which I, in general, think is a good one. I wouldn't say that GDPR is perfect or great, but I think it's a step in the direction where society or countries or governments realize that they have a responsibility also for data and for security and privacy and data protection. So I think this is definitely a step in the right direction. Of course, the question is really, really big, because if you, I don't know if this was implied with the question, but data is something that is really important, as I talked in my talk, because software alone is no longer enough. If you look at what's going on in machine learning and artificial intelligence, neural networks, then having access to the software alone gives you nothing. You need the data to train the network. So data is something that you also need. If you have all the software in the world but not the data, you'd have nothing.
Thank you. I think that's clear. Here's basically, it could be an annoying question probably for developers and for those who want to adopt open source software. I could probably direct this to Giles. This came from Saeed Al-Badi, who's asking how to answer someone that says that open source apps are not secure. We always get this question.
That says that open source what?
That open source applications or software is not secure. How would you answer such a question?
I would say that, that first of all, statistics show that it is more. There was a report created by a company called Coverity a few years back, and they looked at software quality and compared open source versus proprietary. What they did was they counted the number of defects per 1,000 lines of code. And one thing they found was that the number of defects per 1,000 lines of code is about the same for proprietary and open source. And the detail is that the number they find is in favor of open source, actually. The report shows that you have 0.6 defects per 1,000 lines of code for open source and 0.7 something for proprietary. So it's the same, roughly the same value, and it's in favor of open source. What I want to say, though, which is the real difference, is that with open source, everybody has a chance to look at the source code. The bad guys and the good guys. When you look at proprietary software, the only people who have access to the source code is the company who makes it and the bad guys. Because the bad guys will always have access to the source code. They will pay somebody, they will steal a copy somewhere. And those who have access to the source code can find bugs. And if they're the bad guys, they will exploit the bugs. If they're the good guys, they will propose fixes to the bugs. I'll take 2 minutes to tell the story.
Sure, definitely.
When I was at Sun Microsystems, we open sourced our operating system, Solaris. And we made the open source version available on a Monday. The next day, Tuesday, somebody came to us, sent us a report of a serious, really, really bad bug that would let anybody become administrator on the machine by just typing the right logging string at a login prompt. Really bad bug. And when they sent that to us, they also sent us a patch. The guy had looked at the source code and found a really bad bug, wrote a patch and sent it to us saying, this is the problem. We looked at the patch, we implemented it, we published a temporary patch for customers under support on Thursday. It went well. And on the Saturday, we published the final patch for everybody. That was the fastest time ever in the industry that a security bug was found and patched by a vendor. We couldn't have done it without open source because the person who reported the patch had the source code and gave us reported the bug, had the source code and reported the patch as well. So it really is in favor of open source. When you have open source, somebody finds a bug. If they're a good guy, you will get the patch with it. If they're a bad guy, you will probably get an attack with it.
Thank you for the answer. That could also probably relate to what Professor Dirk was talking about. Now the innovation is user-led, and the user could probably contribute much better in terms of securing these open source softwares. And while you are at it, because I can see many questions coming around this application here about security, and you've talked about blockchain, I think, and you have an experience with blockchain. Could you tell us what would be the situation for blockchain now with quantum computing on the rise and it's on the horizon? Because there are some people or some organizations who have started, implemented, took the first steps, and then now they're rethinking they could be rethinking their decisions on that.
Blockchain and quantum computing. The interesting thing about quantum computing is, and we should have my friend from IBM here because he would be able to give also a part of the answer, but the issue with quantum computing is that there are algorithms that will break traditional cryptography really well once quantum computers are there. And I used to work for a company that does quantum physics-based cryptography. So we did that just to fix that problem. So so that's one area where I'm really aware of. And what happens is that the encryption algorithms that can be broken by quantum computers are really the ones that are used in blockchains like Bitcoin, who use proof of work, intense computation. So if you look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin has been designed from the start to be able to evolve. The encryption strength changes, the parameters vary, so that regardless of the computing power we can throw at it, finding a new block always takes 10 minutes, for example. So I wouldn't worry too much about these kind of blockchains when quantum computers appear, because the algorithms will evolve. They will switch to quantum resistant and things like that. But more importantly, there are a whole bunch of blockchains who don't use these same algorithms and who use other cryptographic primitives, and who don't use proof of work for securing the system. So honestly, I am not really sure that that quantum computing is a forever problem for blockchain. It's a temporary threat that will be addressed normally really simply.
Thanks. I think that sounds like a relief for those who are concerned with security, that now the antidote is there, and it's always going to be there probably. The next question is from Ward Al-Habsi, and I think it's directed to Frank. It reads, can we use NextCloud as a file sender to transfer large files for research purposes? Is there any examples of this use?
That's possible, and NextCloud is used by a lot of universities for exactly that, actually. So there is like organizations like DAISY, which are like the German version of CERN, particle accelerator. They use NextCloud to transfer like petabytes of data around to their research universities for exactly that. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Again, this is probably a related question and was posted by Sulaiman. Can we run operating systems in cloud for users in anywhere without setting it up, without having to set it up? Is that doable?
Yeah, I discussed this once with the old times with an investor, where I said, look, the benefit of NextCloud is that it's so flexible, and the drawback of NextCloud is that it's so flexible. So you can do a lot with NextCloud. You can, with one click, spin up an Amazon AWS instance with NextCloud installed, and you can run it for a lot of users there. There are lots of big service providers where you can run NextCloud on top of. So you can basically deploy it wherever you want. I think there are even like scripts to deploy it on Google Cloud or on the Microsoft Azure Cloud very easily. So it's super easy. Of course, I have to say that if you do this, part of the value proposition of NextCloud goes away, right? If you trust, like, I don't know, the Microsoft Cloud, then why not use Office 365 in the first place? The NextCloud has some encryption features. If you use end-to-end encryption, then you have some protection there, of course. But at the end of the day, NextCloud is all about decentralization. If you deploy NextCloud in the big American clouds, then it's possible, it's easy, but you'd lose some of the value.
Thank you. Professor Dirk, this is a short question. I'll probably try to make it more clear, hopefully. I think you've mentioned in your slides that organizations that are working in the same field could or should collaborate on developing their needs in software. So that sounds like communities of interests, basically, collaborating and creating kind of a pool of let's say shared resources. But this question asks, how could FOSS also be important for governments or for governmental organizations?
I don't think there's a big difference between companies or, say, local governments. Any set of separate entities with some shared interest in software that really is just a cost driver can usually join forces. The challenge is often, though, with local governments, sometimes political. Do you want to work with these other guys or not? Or between companies, it's competition that may get in the way. So the challenge, some sort of product management challenge, if you will, is to find out exactly what is considered not competitively differentiating between these different entities. What can you agree on that is really common to all of you, doesn't make a difference as you face your own constituents, and so you are not inclined to get difficult with the other people to get your particular requirements. So there needs to be a process, which is one of the reasons why we need this sort of foundation as an arbiter, as a body where you have defined rules for settling these disputes or these challenges. You need to have a process where you can agree on what do you share, what's your shared interest here, so that you can get that turned into software, and the things that you cannot agree on are left to your own individual initiative. So that applies to local governments as well as companies, I think. If you're thinking the whole government of a country, it gets tricky, yeah. But maybe you have neighboring countries that have similar requirements, and there's some layers in this ever more complex world of software where you can actually collaborate, irrespective of whatever whatever other disputes you might have.
Thank you. Do you see this becoming like an agenda item for discussion at the advocates of ICT use at the UN, for example, or any of the global non-profit organizations? Could this become one of the agenda items for discussion?
So I can only speculate here. I have not talked with the United Nations or any of these bodies. The closest I got was to the chief agriculturalist when the agriculture people who have similar problems with software came by and asked, what can we do about it? I can easily imagine that this will be of a high relevance as industries which are not the software industry realize that they need to do something about it. So I believe, yes, that's absolutely possible. I would be delighted to help that, but it hasn't happened yet.
All right, thanks. I'd like to encourage the audience to post their questions to the application. These are not the kind of people who you'll see walking around the corridors every day, so we are very fortunate to have them for such a short time. Please take advantage of the opportunity. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add something regarding the governments and open source. There are two elements. First of all, from the United Nations, I've had discussions with them, and they're actually putting in place training programs for refugees that are based on open source. The idea is that refugees, when they arrive in a country, if they have no skills, they represent no interest for the country, and it's very hard to justify accepting them, as we've seen in many places. If they come and they gain skills and they can work, it helps, and open source is a great way to train them on some of the work markets. From a government's interest in open source, what I've heard, and that came from the French government, which is a strong user of open source. They're using open source for two ethical reasons. Well, one ethical and one financial reason. The ethical one is they're saying everything that's developed by a government should belong to the citizens, because in a republic means the thing of the public. So the government is basically belonging to the citizens. So everything they develop should belong to the citizens. It should be open source and shared with the citizens. From a financial perspective, it's really, they have a strange and interesting analysis. They're saying if we pay citizens to develop software, the money we pay to the citizens is not licenses that go to the US, but it's money that goes to the citizens. These citizens use this money to buy food, to pay for their houses, to pay for taxes. And so this money gets re-injected into the society.
Nice.
And these citizens, as they learn to develop the software, they gain knowledge. So, and knowledge is wealth, because they can create companies from that as well. So the government in itself, even though they may be paying for the software the same way they would pay for proprietary software, they're seeing this money injected into something that has a return which is positive. So from an overall state budget, open source is a money or wealth generator instead of being a cost element. And that's an interesting perspective. Again, I heard that from the French government, not necessarily applies to everywhere else.
Thank you. That was very enlightening. Again, there are many other questions. I think let's call them. They're related basically to security, or the other side of the coin, which is privacy. Is privacy there when it comes to open source, and how is it protected? I don't know if you want to answer that, because you're dealing
sure.
NextCloud.
Yeah, I find this very an interesting question, because I think we heard earlier from you your first talk about how the free software movement and the open source movement started. And I think, I don't remember exactly your quote, what you said, but you said something like, look, if you have, the software is free software, then you have control over your thing, your data and your digital stuff. Right? This of course came from the world where you had your computer under your desk, and this was your computer. You paid for the hardware, and you installed free software on it, and then you were basically 100% in control. But of course, nowadays the world is more complex because you have distributed systems, we have clouds and I don't know, phones and everything syncing around and networks and entities in between. And in this world, it's a lot harder to reach this privacy and control thing. And I think the solution here is to have more distributed systems. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody should run their own cloud server in their basement. Some people might. I mean, some people are crazy like me. I have my own mail server. I wouldn't recommend this to anybody, but I do this. But some people do. But even if you get your cloud service from your company or your university or your local service provider, it's already better than basically have one company who does it for the whole planet. So this is not good for privacy and security.
I have two questions for you. I think I'll bundle them up and then I'll move to a question for Professor Dirk. How do you see NextCloud after 5 years? And what is the maximum storage capacity for each user and how can we increase it? And also in terms of related support and resources, we're a bit far from Germany, and how could you offer us support if we decide to implement NextCloud?
Okay, so let's start with the easy question first. The amount of storage per user, I mean, we are free software, there are no limits, right? There is no point of building any limits into the software, so there is no limit. You can store inside Nextload as much data as you have storage until your hard disk or your server is full, but there is nothing in the software, of course. Then about the support, that's a good question. Our business model is, as I have explained, the software is completely open and free software, but we offer enterprise subscriptions similar to what Red Hat and SUSE is doing. And we also, that's the good news, do this through partners. So we have partner companies all over the world. Unfortunately, I'm not really completely sure if you have someone in Oman already. Maybe someone knows someone who could partner with us to do this. But I know that, for example, the Dubai police is a customer from us, and they have a partner. There's at least a partner in Dubai. So we have partners all over the world. So this is the thing. What was the first question?
How do you see NextCloud in 5 years?
Yeah,
and I'll add to that also. How do you make money? If this is all free.
The hardest question. That's why I spared this for the end. I mean, I'm very ambitious. So I hope that we, as an open source and free software community, we can really compete with the big guys. So for us, it would mean that we can really compete with Microsoft Office 365 and others to be basically a player in this market where not everybody depends on this one solution. This would be my personal dream and goal for the next 5 years. And I know that everybody in the community has the same goal. This is why everybody's working super hard in this direction. How far we come there, I don't know. But this would be like the goal for 5 years. And how you make money, I already explained it, I think. You can use the software as you want, download it, do whatever you want with it. But you can also work with us as a company. You get a subscription, and then you get like a special version of Nextcloud, which has a more hardened release cycle, security patches earlier. I think you explained it as Sun earlier, right? Where your customers got security fixes before the rest. We do exactly the same. You have access to documentation, to scalability reviews, and so on. So basically similar as Red Hat. That's how you make money.
Thank you. By the way, those questions came from Tuhaib and Omar. And we have a question from Ahmed Laghdani now for Professor Dirk. What do you think of Microsoft acquiring GitHub and IBM acquiring Red Hat, considering both companies' history? IBM is the biggest contributor to Red Hat, while Microsoft isn't, or did not contribute much to open source community. This is actually a worry for the open source community. It's one day it's open source and then overnight it becomes something else.
Well, so that's a big question. Before I get there, can I shortly make a note on privacy, because there's a bigger story behind that. Open source is very inspiring, for example, for students, but in general because of the idea of sharing and altruism and working together for a better world. And that is truly important. But it is also important to understand that the things that the open source world invented, these licenses, these collaboration mechanisms, the tools, are in many ways neutral. They can be used for good or bad. They can be used to prevent privacy or help privacy. If anything, the open source world asking for open collaborative processes will lay more things in the open than they will keep private. In the open source definition, it explicitly says no discrimination against fields of endeavor. So if you change an open source license to say my software cannot be used for the evil in the world, it's not open source any longer. So it's very important to move to an understanding there's a tool chest of different things that you can use for purposes, and you use it for your goals. Now, going back to the big industry questions about the recent acquisitions of 2018, Microsoft has come a long way, so that's for sure. Microsoft has joined the Linux Foundation. Microsoft understands Grok's open source, I believe, under its new CEO. So I'm not so worried about GitHub changing its tune and not being a place for open source software development in the future. I have very little worries that Microsoft will go back to old ways and be unfriendly to the open source world. IBM and Red Hat, I don't know, but I trust that IBM will be a good steward. I don't see any reason to assume they will not be valuing their $34 billion investment. But in some sense, in a smart way, when the Linux distributors, as the commercialization of the Linux operating system pitched against Microsoft 15, 20 years ago, came about, the companies purchasing, the users, were smart enough to realize, no, we don't just want one Linux distributor to fight Microsoft and then be in the same problem spot because there's exactly one Linux distributor we depend upon. They deliberately split resources, many did, and utilized different Linux distributors. So for that reason, SUSE, which was sadly for a German company not winning against Red Hat, was propped up and supported, so there are viable Linux distribution alternatives to Red Hat. Should IBM turn bad, which I don't think, there will be viable Linux distribution alternatives, and that are commercially supported, and that's the strength of open source.
Thank you very much. I think we're running out of time, but I have time for probably two more questions. One from Talal Said, and that's again about security, but this time about digital forensics in cloud. So what's the challenge of cloud and security perspectives, and how to make the digital forensics working in cloud, in your opinion, basically? Do you want to take that, or yeah?
Wow. The biggest challenge from cloud and security is that when it comes to cloud, you don't really know where your stuff is running and who's sitting next to the machine and looking at it. That said, most cloud service providers have a much better security story in terms of securing their data centers than you could have as a company. I think it's a balanced issue. Some governments will be running that would be much more secure, and of course the tricky part is making sure the data that transits between where you are and where the cloud is transits in a secure way. Again, whether it's traditional cryptography or quantum-based cryptography, if you're paranoid enough. It really depends on the use case. The technology is there to make it as secure as it needs to be.
All right, as forensics always does, depends on the case. So I hope that answered your question, Mr. Talal Said. Last question for Frank, and then we'll have to end this. This comes from Faisal Nu'mani. He is from Oman Gas Company, and he asks how can they get benefit from NextCloud in the oil and gas companies, as they have a lot of data, and also does NextCloud have the ability to analyze the data?
So NextCloud, I think I haven't really clearly mentioned this in my talk, is actually software that contains, it's basically built out of a lot of different plugins, different parts. We call them apps, the server-side plugins, and there are lots and lots of them. So by itself, NextCloud can't do any analysis of any data. But we have plugins to do that. So there are some plugins to visualize and to analyze medical data, for example, that already exist, built by some hospitals, so you can use them. Or if there are already some other applications that analyze data, you can integrate them. So a project we are doing with DIKE. DIKE is the organization in Denmark, which is the organization which basically does all the IT infrastructure for all universities in Denmark. And they have a supercomputer there, and they're using NextCloud, and they're integrated in a way that every time a researcher uploads a certain file, an external script is triggered, which sends the data to the supercomputer, analyzes it, and when it's done, sends it back, and it shows up in the NextCloud on the phone of the researcher, on the tablet, or whatever they want to do. So something like that we can do, but we don't really do any data mining or anything ourselves. But there are lots of other very nice open source software solutions for that can be easily integrated into NextCloud, but we are not really, that's not really our focus.
Thank you, Frank. I think that's time for us, but I'll probably take the liberty and give each one of you a minute if you want to have any closing remarks before we end this. And also, I'd like to apologize for those who posted their questions. We didn't have the time to answer them. But I promise you, these guys are going to be around during the breaks, and you could probably contact them, ask questions, or they've posted most of their contacts here, so you could probably email them your questions. So, Frank, if you want to add anything.
Just a quick remark. I really like the aspect from Dirk that open source is really about collaboration also, not only the license. And the licenses are important, I completely agree with that, but the way to collaborate between different organizations on the same playing field, I think this is really big. So this is not mentioned often enough, so I completely agree with that. NextCloud, for example, we have contributors all over the world, really most countries, 1,800 contributors who work together to build like this software together, and this wouldn't be possible in the old world, in no way. So we couldn't employ all 1,800 developers. We couldn't coordinate between them, right? How should like the management structure work there, reporting, product management? This would be totally impossible. But this just works with the open source tool. So I think this is a very, very good aspect. So thanks for bringing this.
Thank you. Professor Dirk?
Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Now I just thought I'm at a university, so maybe I can encourage students to go into open source. It's both a positive and a warning story, because so for students, open source is out there. You can just get active. It's usually communities that are happy and willing to work with any reasonable suggested contributions, as long as you're respectful to a project and incrementally approach it and discuss, say, I would like to make a contribution, here's how it looks like, and then you will usually be well received and even guided to become part of a community. I'm emphasizing this because it's actually, and you will not be surprised perhaps to hear this from me, economically important. There have been lots of studies which show the significance, economic significance of being a software developer active in open source. So as a student, you can get a head start on that, and it will be beneficial to your professional life. How so? Well, studies show it will improve your salary. Companies actually value not only your abilities and skills, they will also value that you have already demonstrated that you can work in teams, meaning you have social capabilities. And beyond that, if you are actually contributing to an economically important project, meaning a component that is widely used, then some employers specifically value your position in that project. So this has been shown in studies. It goes so far, this is the cautionary side of it, that there are companies out there who analyze your developer behavior on GitHub, make it your portfolio, if you will, so that employers can judge you based on your abilities there. So think of your open source contributions or potential open source contributions as a public portfolio of your abilities and your work. And if you do it right, it will be very beneficial to your career in the software industry.
Thank you, Professor. That's really enlightening.
Okay, as a closing remark, maybe I'd like to point out that when an enterprise is considering open source, whether it is to use it or to contribute to it, always keep in mind that if you find reasons to do it that are beyond just saving money, you are going to benefit from open source a lot more, okay? Use open source because it's a great engine for innovation, open innovation. Use open source as a talent acquisition, talent retention mechanism, hiring open source developers by encouraging them to contribute to open source projects during their work time. Use it as a mechanism for speed to market. Use it as a mechanism for marketing, positioning yourself as a thought leader. All of these benefits that go way beyond just saving money on license costs are extremely important ways of making your open source story a very productive one. And to give you an idea of these kind of benefits, I'll just answer 2 points in the questions there quickly. One question was, why do hackers use open source? Because of trust. By being able to access the source code that they're using, they know it's not going to turn against them. They know there's no Trojan horse inside. So use open source for trust, whether you're a corporate or a hacker. And somebody was asking how much Microsoft hasn't contributed to open source that much in the question on GitHub. And it's actually, they're the biggest contributor to GitHub. Not necessarily in code, they do a lot of documentation work and contributions in other forms than just code. But they are a very strong contributor, and when they joined the Open Invention Network, they donated 60,000 patents that cover things that are part of the Linux sphere. And so by donating these 60,000 patents, they're giving the open source developers the permission to write stuff around these areas of technologies and these processes without the fear from being sued. So that is a significant contribution to the open source world. Microsoft has really changed, as you've pointed out. They're really going it in the right direction. And I don't know why they're doing this, but I suspect it's because they think it's the right way to go.
Thank you all, and I wish you a nice afternoon and evening ahead. We're very happy to have you with us. Thank you.
بعد جلسة النقاش الممتعة والمفيدة ندعوكم لاستراحة قصيرة نعود بعدها في 12:30 لتكملة جلسات المؤتمر.
After this interesting discussion, we will have a 30-minute break. We will meet up again for the third session at 12:30.
مرحبا بكم في الجلسة الثالثة للمؤتمر، والتي ستكون تحت عنوان المصدر المفتوح كجسر لنقل التقنية، والتي يبدأها الدكتور ناصر الزيدي مدير مركز نظم المعلومات بجامعة السلطان قابوس، وسيتحدث عن استخدام البرمجيات الحرة والمفتوحة المصدر بجامعة السلطان قابوس ليس لمجرد خفض التكاليف.
Welcome back to our third session titled Open Source as a Bridge for Technology Transfer, that will start with the talk given by Dr. Nasser Azidi, Director of Center of Information Systems at Sultan Qaboos University. His talk will be about FOSS in Sultan Qaboos University beyond cost cutting.
شيء بوينتر بوينتر شيء بوينتر to change. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Thank you all for coming to this presentation. I'm Nasser Azidi. I'm an associate professor in computer science department and also the director of the Center for Information Systems. And throughout this talk, I'll be shedding some lights about the usage of FOSS solutions in SQU and what are the benefits that we have foreseen as a result of this adoption. So before the start, I'm going to give you just a brief overview about the IT services in SQU that would just give you an idea about the infrastructure, about the environment that we are running. And then I'll go through some examples which I think are worth highlighting about that have been adopted in SQU. We'll then talk a little bit about some of the benefits that we have seen and will continue to see probably in the future as a result of this adoption. And finally, I'll conclude by some success factors that made this thing possible at the end of the day. So when we talk about IT infrastructure in SQU, we are actually talking about huge infrastructure, a huge landscape of users. So we daily service more than 25,000 users. These are students, staff, contractors, visitors. So they all come and they use our IT services on a daily basis. And of course, to cater for all of this large number of users with all different needs, you need a huge infrastructure. So CIS, the Center for Information Systems, hosts all SQU data. So the grades for students, the salaries for the staff, conference proceedings, everything. So everything you could think about is hosted in our data center, and that takes a lot of burden actually to make sure and know it's in a safe place, in a reliable place, and available all times. We run the major systems. HRFMS is the Human Resources and Finance Management System. We run SIS, Students Information System. We run CMS, Correspondence Management Systems, and these are just to mention a few. So these are some major legacy systems that we maintain, and they are actually the backbone of almost all IT solutions in SQU. In addition to providing hardware and software support, we also provide the basic services like the internet, the email, cloud services, and many IT solutions for teaching and research and administration. So this is just a brief overview about the things that we do. To do this, our data center actually hosts a very large number of servers. So we are talking about around 300 servers, different platforms. Some of them are physical, some of them are virtual, and the network, there are around 800 switches connecting every corner of SQ with each other, of course, with fiber optics. So it's a huge infrastructure to look after. All right, so that's just to give you an idea about the things that we are doing. Now, we have been encouraging and adopting the use of open source solutions for different reasons, as we will discuss at the end of this talk. But I'm just going to go through some of the major solutions that I think are worth highlighting, and just to give you an idea about about their adoption in here. So one of the major things that this project is still not completed. We have finished about 60% of it, but this is about acquiring a new ERP solution. Existing solution that runs the university is HRFMS, which is an Oracle-based homemade solution, which is based in a little bit old technology. It's been now for running the university for almost 20 years. And it's just about time to change it. Of course, going into this solution doesn't come from the blue. There has been a lot of studies, and we've looked at many options, including licensed software and solutions from very well-known companies. And then at the end of the day, we opted to go for Odoo for many reasons, but to be honest, one of them is really cost of acquiring this solution. In the current phase, in the first phase, this is going to cover different modules of any ERP system: payroll, HR, finance, different aspects of supply chain. And in the future, we are going to add other modules to the solution. For those who doesn't know, this is based on Apache Tomcat, and it uses PostgreSQL as a backend database. Development is done in Python, and actually this is one of the first adoptions of Python in the center. This is one of the first solutions where we adopt Python into our infrastructure. Of course, as everybody knows, adopting an ERP solution is not only the technology. There have been a lot of processes before it. One of the major things is that we have done a very extensive process re-engineering so that we can make use of this solution. But that's one major thing. Another important solution that is based on open source is the SQ ePortal. And this is an electronic portal which provides a variety of self-services, electronic self-services to different types of stakeholders in SQ, starting from students all the way to academics, admin staff, and even alumni. There are a very large number of services, and we are continuously adding new features, new services to this portal. The portal is based on LifeRay, and the development is done mainly using Java Enterprise, using Spring framework, if I am not very technical. The development of this service is one of the things that we are proud of. Every service in this portlet is entirely 100% developed by CIS staff. So it's locally developed from scratch. Before the LifeRay portal, before adapting the open source solution here, we were in Oracle portal. So we ran Oracle portal for many years, and then we switched to this one in 2015 with added new features. And at that time, we also adapted Spring framework for the development. The common two systems, SQ journals and SQ conferences, are based on open source solutions. This one is based on open journal system. Just for your information, SKU publishes around 6 refereed journals. They accept submissions from authors from all, every corner. And the entire life cycle of submitting a journal publication, from the submission all the way to the review, to the publication, to the archiving, is all done through this system. Previously, before the adoption of this system, every single journal of the 6 has been doing it in a separate way. So the Journal for Science, for example, is handled by the College of Science. The Journal of Medicine is handled by the College of Medicine in a totally different way. There is no coherency, and everybody uses their own solution, and they are paying their own license for this. This solution unified everything in one single platform that covers the entire life cycle of journal publications, and the same thing applies for SKU conferences. SKU runs very large number of conferences yearly. And all of these conferences go through very, very well-defined life cycle, from the approval point of view until publishing, submission of journals, review of journals, participation in the conferences, and the entire life cycle of of conference publications. And again, this system covers the entire life cycle. One of the additions that we did to the system is that we have added an online payment plugin to the solution that is connected to the online payment gateway in ITA in Oman here. And that is now just a plugin to the new solution. So we actually contributed to this open source solution, not only used it and customized it, but we added this plugin, which can also be adopted by anyone, of course, after testing and going through the process. One of the major solutions also that I probably should talk about is the SKU data warehouse project. As a university with a very large number of students and staff, there is a very huge amount of data going around related to students, related to grades, related to staff, research, teaching, you name it, infrastructure. A huge amount of data is going around, and decision makers, top administration, and actually not only decision makers and top administrations, but also executives, they need live data to make informed decisions about everyday business of the university. Currently, we have a small dashboard which is based on Oracle portal as well, and it is available for some top officials in SKU. Now, this project will move this dashboard to a completely full open source solution. Knowledge, we are using it for data analytics, and this is going to be very dynamic, and it's going to connect to different data marts at different operational units in SKU, providing up-to-date analytics to the decision makers. I should also mention that this project involves a component which is basically an integration with Ministry of Higher Education. And that's again done with using open source solutions. So we integrate with Ministry of Higher Education, where we push a lot of statistics to the Ministry of Higher Education for their statistical analysis. That includes data about students and staff and infrastructure and even financial information. Right, so these are the things that I probably should touch on. These are related mostly to the end users. They are user programs, if you may say so. I should also mention 2 other solutions I think they are worth talking about. One of them is GitHub. Everybody here probably should know about GitHub. And it's a source code versioning control system. And we have our own installation in our data center. The GitHub installation in SKU actually hosts all source code of our systems and their documentations. So this is our own local installation of GitHub. It's fully used and utilized and customized, configured by CIS staff. And actually, it helped a lot. You know, when you are in a position that requires you to manage this huge set of code that is being changed by different group members, a solution like GitHub is a must. And it helped the development a lot in SKU. This is, of course, not seen by end users, but for the programmers, for the technicians, for the system administrators, this is a great support. One of the other solutions we are also very proud of is the adoption of an automated ITSM solution, an IT service management solution. This is based on ITOB. ITOB is an open source solution, and it is based on ITIL framework for IT service management. Adoption of this solution actually comes as a second phase of aligning our IT service management with international standards. So we decided to go with ITIL international standards, and ITIL, the life cycle of ITIL, different components of it, is adopted by ITOB, and so we found it as a very good solution to start with. So we adopted this solution. It's fully customized, fully configured by CIS team. We have updated and customized our configuration management database, where our entire infrastructure is now loaded to the system, including every single piece of hardware in our data center is now available in this solution, and we can track it to the machine. At the current stage, the solution supports service management, incident management, service requests, and also recently, we have also adopted change management. Users have access to the solution where they can report incidents, and they can also request services. And the solution, of course, supports defining SLAs with the users with certain service level targets that should be met, and automatic escalations are available if these targets are not met. So this helped a lot, actually enhancing the services provided to the end user customers. One of the other solutions that probably I should mention, although there isn't much of development in here, but I think this is a very big move, not only technically, but in change management. You know, SQ library is probably the largest library in the country, and there are almost 70 machines, 70 dedicated computers. They all run Windows, and they are only used to search the library catalog. So the only usage of that machine is a browser, where they search the library catalog. These machines has to be in a separate domain for us. We have to manage them in a separate way because they need certain privileges. And so we decided to, well, look, why don't we look for another solution? It's only a kiosk. It's only used for searching the catalog. So we found a solution. It's a kiosk-based, a Linux kiosk-based solution, which only provided the search catalog interface for the end users, and we managed to replace 70 of these machines. When I said this is not only a technical thing, it takes us a lot of time, to be honest with you, to convince people to adopt the new solutions. You know, people are very happy with what they had, and changing them to a completely new solution was not an easy task. But we took that challenge, and alhamdulillah, we managed to install the solution. It's now working fine. We also installed it in the Mosque library recently, and there is a plan to replace other libraries in the campus. So that would account for more than 100 plus machines. They are all converted to this new search engine, search kiosks. Education-wise, I don't know if I still have time, but just to touch on a few things. We believe the change shouldn't be only operational. It shouldn't only be systems that you change, but students should also be exposed to these technologies, because at the end of the day, these are the human resources you prepare for the future. So in the computer science department where I belong, we've managed to change 2 labs, which were just few semesters back, are only Windows, and we managed to change all of them to Linux. They are now only Linux machines. And believe it or not, it's not an easy task. The resistance to change is not only from students, because students, you can just push them and ask them, if you are not going to do this, I'm going to give you an F. Easy story. The issue is actually with the instructors and the technical teams to adopt the new solutions. But alhamdulillah, this has been a successful story. We have now moved two of these labs. All the courses taught in these labs are fully in Linux, and we are moving new courses to get exposed, if I may say so, if not converted to get exposed to new solutions. And that includes courses like operating systems, networking, mobile development, Java, different courses of programming, and you name it. There are some other initiatives that I just should mention. These solutions are being developed. I highlighted these two for a good reason. These 2 solutions, the College of Science Herbarium system and SQ 1000-point systems, I'm not going to talk about the functionalities, just not to confuse everyone in here. But these are systems requested by SQ units. Why I'm highlighting here, these 2 systems, we have outsourced them. We are not developing them here in-house by our team. But we put as one of our requirements for those who tender for these 2 systems is that we insist in developing these using fully open source solutions. So not only the solutions that we develop ourselves, but also the solutions that we outsource to third parties, we also put that as a requirement, as a system requirement. Of course, whenever possible, we put that frame whenever possible. And we believe it is always possible, to be honest. Well, I can just to give room for whatever other cases that might arise. I should also mention this SPSS versus PSPP, if I spelled it correctly. Everybody probably is familiar with SPSS. SQ is an educational institute. We use a lot of license for SPSS. College of Science, a few years back, acquired 300 license only for SPSS, only College of Science, one college out of 10. Recently, we managed to convince the end users to switch to PSPP, which is an open source alternative to this. Every version of SPSS depends on the packages that you acquire. Every version of SPSS will cost you around something between 80 to 120 Omani Riyals. And then you do the math and you find how much saving has been done to only by adopting one single solution. Right. So that's just a general overview about some of the systems that we have been using in SQ. Now, what benefits? Of course, cost cutting is one of the major things. Either development cost, licensing cost, maintenance cost, AMCs, and so on and so forth. That's just a very quick calculations, very rough and quick calculations that I have done. For the systems that I have just mentioned to you, the estimated cost, if we have to procure these and pay license and use non-open source solutions, would cost us about 3.25 million Omani Riyals. That's around $8 million US or more. Only for the solutions that I've just mentioned to you. And we believe that's a very big saving. So if there is anything else except cost cutting, it is still worth going for this direction. Of course, you have to put the other factors into the picture. Other things, other very big achievement that I think is a key benefit is building capacity. Oman, as a developing country, needs to build capacity when it comes to software usage and when it comes to software development. And open source solutions actually allows building capacity in terms of using the software, because when you have an operating system that costs you $0, you shouldn't worry about the gap, some people would be able to procure the solution, others would not be able to do it because it costs you zero. It doesn't only cost you zero, but you are free to redistribute it. So it's easy to acquire, it's easy to develop, and that enhances the usage of these solutions across the different spectrums of the society. When it comes to software development, and as a development center, the ability to freely modify and distribute and learn is a very big plus, because inspecting programmers probably know this better than anyone else, but probably the most important tool for programmers to learn is to look at the source code. And once you have the source code, you can learn a lot, and then you can build your capacity based on other people's experience. Open source, by its nature, it allows collaborative, collaboration between different communities, and it provides exceptional training opportunities. There are open communities. You can just pose your question, pose your ideas, share your concerns, and you would find very huge communities that would interact with you. And of course, again, when it comes to open source solutions, because you can contribute to the development, you can contribute to the customization of this, you can also inject your cultural and local context constraints to the standards. So you can, for example, inject the Arabic language to these systems. You can put the constraints that are related to your culture and to your local context to the solutions. And nobody's going to stop you as long as it satisfies the standards. Right, so there are many other benefits. I'm probably not going to need them, but at least our experiment in SKU, in the solutions that we have adopted, we managed to escape the vendor lock. So we no more are tightened with X or Y vendors for these solutions. Reliability and stability, and we have witnessed this. We run a lot of different servers using different platforms, and statistics shows this very crystal clear when it comes to the stability of these solutions and reliability. I believe, although we haven't done this yet in SKU, sure, I'm finishing in 2 minutes. Relying, especially when it comes to national level, relying in black boxes for security, for antiviruses, for firewalls, for proxies, is really a security constraint, because you have no idea what goes into these black boxes. The ability to adopt open source solutions for security reasons is, I think, is of a national interest for every country. I mentioned it enables localization, and it reduces software piracy because of the availability of different free and open source alternatives. I'll conclude by this slide. These are some of the success factors we believe they are crucial for adoption of any open source solution. The first one, and I think the most important, is bringing all stakeholders on board. Convincing top management, convincing your technical team, user awareness is what would make this change possible. We shouldn't expect that we can bring an open source solution and just deploy it and ask people to use it without doing a very proper and intensive change management plan. So we believe getting stakeholders on board is a key success factor. Training and knowledge transfer, you need to train your technical team. You need to provide them opportunities on how to obtain new knowledge. We also need to build, as a nation, as a university, and as a center, for my context, we need to build local support. one of the challenges in open source communities is finding support for the solution that you build. So you are confronted with this issue, and you have to build the local support either in an industry, in academia, within your technical team, but we have to build the local support. We have to be able to support the solutions that we adopt. We have to foster engagement with FOSS communities, because that's the direction where the source where you could get a lot of help. And doing a very good selection is very important. There are so many alternatives outside there, and doing your homework and doing a proper selection would contribute a lot to the successful implementation of the solution. Share and distribute. It's open source, so we shouldn't only use, we should share and redistribute. That makes it much more beneficial for the community. And of course, it might sound weird a little bit, but I believe providing incentives for the projects, for the technical team, would help a lot. At the end of the day, the technical teams who adopt this will invest from their time and effort in learning new technologies. So, giving some incentives would definitely keep the momentum and keep the wheel rolling for different other factors. That was my last slide. I apologize if I have taken longer than what I should. Thank you all for listening. Thanks a lot.
ندعو الآن الفاضل أبهاس أبن هاف مؤسس شركة ديب روت جينولينكس للحديث عن تبني مبادئ البرمجيات الحرة لشراء البرمجيات وتطويرها ونشرها وصيانتها.
Thank you, Dr. Nasser, for your talk. Now, the following talk will be given by the keynote speaker, Abhas Abhinav, founder of Deeproot GNU Linux. The talk will be about applying the principles of free software to software procurement, development, deployment, and maintenance.
This is the next button?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abhas, and I lead a company called Deeproot GNU Linux in Bangalore, India. The topic that I'll be talking about is how we can understand and apply the principles of free software to various other situations where we need to procure, maintain, or develop software. And the reason I talk about this is I'm drawing from my experience of working with organizations in various capacities over the past 18 years. And while many times organizations have tried to use free software for their purposes, a lot of times those implementations have failed. And what I would attempt to do is explain why these implementations failed and how we can adopt the ethos of the free software community in terms of ensuring that these implementations don't fail for us. So I'll start with 3 stories. I'm going to talk about a story of a public sector technology company, a university, and a social enterprise, how they tried to use free software, and basically what happened. And you will see how these stories are actually pretty similar, and we will draw the conclusion out of those stories. So let's look at the first one. There was this public sector company. They got another company, they wanted to build a mail server, a mail service for a government department. And they decided that the best thing to use would be to use free software in GNU Linux to build that service, right? Why did they think like that? Well, they felt free software provides a better technical product. It would provide cost advantages, so they wouldn't have to spend so much to build a mail service. And it's efficient and it's secure. So, well, there's nothing wrong with these goals. They depended upon an outsourcing partner to implement it, right? So, this is one situation. what happened was that the reason they were not able to succeed with this implementation is that the people who developed the software put licensing constraints on it that you would not expect a free and open source software solution to have. And then after some time they could not use it, they had to shelve the entire project and start from scratch, and they actually shifted to a proprietary software solution because it fixed the problem that free software had. Okay, so that's a very unfortunate incident, but if they had taken care of a few things, that free software implementation wouldn't have failed. So those are the lessons that we will look at. Let's look at another case study of a university where they wanted to build a digital solution to evaluate exam papers. And again they thought, let's use free software because it will make us more productive, it is an efficient way of doing things. We would be able to use technology in a process that is extremely time consuming and labor intensive. And it will allow us to scale. So when you're evaluating exam papers, you want to do it with hundreds and thousands of faculty members at the same time. So free software is a way to build a scalable solution. Again, they were depending upon someone else to build it and implement it and run the solution for them. But again, this sort of a solution also failed. They were not able to sustain that for a very long time. And they had to fall back to a more homegrown method because that worked for them. It did not have the problems that were imposed because of the choice of using a free software tool. Okay? Let's look at yet another case where there was a social enterprise, a non-profit, who wanted to build a digital learning platform so that they could train various organizations about the values that they were talking about as social enterprise and non-profit. However, so the reason they chose free software for building this platform was that they wanted to do it quickly. So they thought, let's use an existing free software tool, let's modify it, and we would be able to reach the market quickly, right? It would be secure, it would have a good features. This is a very popular tool, so it has the best technology at it. But again, they were depending on someone else to develop it, implement it, and host it for them. So what are the problems with that approach? The problems are that when things failed, they couldn't get a grasp of what was happening and why it was happening, and now who should fix it, right? So after spending a lot of effort and time and money building these solutions, the solutions failed, right? So what was the problem? Well, my way of looking at it is that the results that they got out of building the solutions, they did not serve the goals that they had, right? So we had these goals that I listed out. So they were trying to achieve these goals by choosing free software to build the solution. However, what they got did not achieve those goals. So they could not take advantage of the fact that they were using free software, right? And which means that a lot of time and opportunity and effort and money was wasted. So now the question is, what can we do to ensure that we don't land into these sort of situations? Well, the reason they landed in these situations is because they were using free software but they didn't have source code. Now it might look very odd that you tried to build a solution, you've tried to implement it using free software, but there is no source code. And that is because there are people who use the software, but they don't believe in the principles which have built that software or the platform. And so when they build a custom solution for an organization, they did not provide source code. And the customer didn't ask for it because they're not used to getting source code with the solutions that they implement, right? Secondly, they had a lack of knowledge about the implementation. They outsourced it. They thought the partner could do everything. And when the partner could not do something, they were left helpless. So they had no knowledge of what was happening. They had also no awareness of the principles of free software licensing and the practices. So when you work in a free software community, everything is open. The discussions are open. The source code is open. Your bug reports are open. The method of deploying that software, the documentation, it's all shared, right? So you don't question. There is no question about how someone is going to do something, right? Now, when you're not aware of these principles and you're building a solution which builds upon free software as a part of your infrastructure, you will not be able to apply these principles to your situation. And when someone else cannot do it for you, what happens? The choices did not deliver the intentions, but who got blamed? Free software, right? So free software gets a bad name because they were not able to deliver the goals. They had intentions. They wanted a secure system. They wanted to have a good time to market. They wanted a secure system. They wanted to scale up. They wanted the best technology. No, and they wanted it at a very low cost. But they did not use one of the most core aspects of that software system, which is the freedom they had to learn, understand, and build their own capacity and awareness. Right? So blaming free software is suboptimal, because I don't think the blame is with the software itself or the licensing or the fact that it's free. Somewhere we all have to share the responsibility as to why the choices we made could not deliver on the intentions that we had. So we cannot intend one thing and do something else and magically expect to achieve what we set out to, right? We have to take meaningful action to ensure we achieve our intention. So, well, how do we do that? And that's the biggest question. But these are the things that free software can help us with, and that's what I'm sort of going to explain today. There are 4 parts that I outlined as to how we avoid these problems. The first is awareness of free software principles. What I mean by free software principles is that when you understand how free software works, how people package the software that they publish online, how they test it out, how they collaborate to fix problems or extend the software or add more features to it, you will understand how to work with anyone else who is going to build up on that software. So for example, one of the most important parts of free software is the fact that source code is usually put into a version control system, which means that everyone has access to the history of changes that were made to the software, who made those changes, when they were made, why they were made. You can correlate those changes to the software to bug reports or feature requests or your milestones and roadmap. But a lot of software development that happens, it doesn't depend on version control. So again, one of the core principles of collaborative free software development is version control. And if you understand that, you can ask for anyone working on a project with you or doing a project with you to use version control, because it's critical. It's critical because you can achieve transparency because of version control, right? So that's what I mean by principles. Once we understand those principles, we have to be vigilant about them. We have to keep reminding ourselves, look, this is how things should be. I'm not able to understand these parts of the system, so something could be wrong. So by remaining vigilant, we ensure that our goals, we can come closer to achieving the goals we have. And remaining involved is again a third very important thing. I think a lot of times the reason some of the case studies that I presented failed is because the customers and the owners on the customer side were not involved. They were very hands-off. They had a lot of trust, which is good, but there should be a way of validating and verifying trust also. And again, free software provides one of the best ways of verifying and validating trust. So, by being involved, when I say corresponding involvement, I mean whatever our capacity is, whatever efforts or time we can put in. But that involvement will ensure that we can apply the principles of free software development to our own situation. And lastly, focusing on self-reliance. If I can make myself competent, then I have that much less dependence on others. And again, this is something that free software empowers us with, that opportunity to learn and do things on our own. So if we keep focusing on that aspect, it would be easy for us to make the rest of the choices, which would help us not land in tough challenges later on. So let's look at the sort of goals that people generally have, right? So when you start a project, when you start an implementation, when you get someone to do some development for you, what are the goals you have, right? You want a system to scale, you want privacy, you want to be able to maintain that system on your own, you want the opportunity to extend it, you want to integrate that system with other systems, you don't want it to be an island, you want transparency in how things are happening, you want to build competency, so you want a sustainable implementation. So these are all very good values to have. Now my problem when I work with a lot of customers is that there is no problem specifying these goals in a RFQ or in a tender or in a requirement document. The problem is how to get someone to deliver on these goals. How do you get someone to build a system which is going to scale? How do you get someone to build a system that you can maintain on your own? How do you build a system that is easy to extend, that is transparent, that enables you to become self-reliant, right? So those are the questions. There's nothing wrong with our intentions here. There's nothing wrong with our goals. But if we were just a little bit more aware about how free software works and the techniques and principles that are applied in communities, then we can protect ourselves, and then we would really be able to achieve all these goals and much more than this, right? So what are these principles? Like I said earlier, the opportunity to learn and cultivate ownership. So that is, I regard that as one of the most important principles, because availability of source code and the ability to run that source code on a hardware of our choice means that we can really own that solution. So what I mean by ownership here is that if I'm going to use a black box and I don't know what's happening inside, though I might be the financial owner of that black box, I'm not really a true owner, because ownership should also imply my ability to understand what's happening inside something, or at some level, or I should be able to get someone who can understand and do something with it. So black boxes by default don't cultivate ownership. They don't encourage ownership, and ownership can come only out of having access to how things work, to source code, to the details of how something is built and implemented, right? So that is one aspect. The other aspect is, like I said earlier, to build competency. On your level of technical expertise, you can choose to be involved. And whatever involvement you have with a project, it will contribute to how good you can be at it, right? So there is no one whose permission you have to take to do those things. You can take a piece of software and read about it and learn to set it up. And the more you fail, the more you will learn, till the day you don't fail anymore and you get better at using that software or tool, right? So this opportunity to build competency is very important, because it's something which is very unique to the domain of free and open source software. No other system can provide this opportunity to us. And finally, this is the highest achievement that we can have. It's saving cost and doing something better is fine. But if we can do it ourselves and maintain it ourselves, then we also meet other goals that we had. You know, the previous slide that I looked at. So how do we do all this? We should be able to do this in a transparent, auditable, and reproducible manner. And I will, explain these words very specifically and why I use them. Because again, unless I'm able to reproduce something on my own, I can't really know if it works. And today there is a lot of effort going on in the free software community on reproducibility project. There is a reproducible builds website, in fact you can check it out, which talks about this aspect in every free software distribution like Debian or for other projects which release binaries. So we should be able to reproduce something which has been done, and there are principles of how to do that, right? So I will talk about that as well. Okay, so let's look at how we can do these things. We've looked at what problems we can face. We've looked at why we face those problems, and how free software provides us the opportunity to not face those problems in the near future. So let's look at what we can do to make the right choices so that we can reach our goals. The first is about choosing free software. And there are 4 elements that I specifically want to highlight: source code, version control, packaging, and testing. So I talked about source code a few minutes back, where I said that it is what goes into building your end result. But there is also something called equivalent and corresponding source code. So if I give you the source code, but I don't give you the configuration which takes to make that source code meaningful, or to secure it, or to deploy it, then that source code is not good enough, right? So the general public license, the GNU general public license, has this line in the license where it talks about the corresponding source code, which means that if I give you a C source code and I don't give you the make file, you just will not know how to compile it. So that source code is not useful to you, right? So we should have source code, but we should have equivalent and corresponding source code. The next thing is, it's good to have a version control system which backs that source code, so that you know which is the latest version of the source code, what changes were made to it, when they were made, and by whom. So being able to track changes to the source code and make those changes indelible is very important. And that's where the version control system provides a very specific value, right? Packaging. How am I going to package and deploy that source code? Am I going to package it into a Debian package? Am I just going to copy a few files into a web server directory? Am I going to package it using Docker or package it into a virtual machine. So when we package software, we enable others to deploy it with great ease. But one more thing we are doing when we package software is we are compiling all the things that the software depends upon into a single place, right? So packaging is important. Choosing to package the software is important. What I have seen is that not everyone packages software. If it is custom software, a lot of times it could be all based on free software, but it might not even have a version control system, or it might not even have a packaging strategy, right? So insisting on packaging the software is very important, because packaging can have a 1:1 relation to the version control system. There is a way of doing that, right? And testing it. How do I validate the software? How do I know that changes to the software don't break functionality which used to work earlier? How do I know that the source code actually works without running it, right? So again, doing testing today is much easier. There are far more modern techniques that we can use to test software out, and we can automate that part also. So these 4 things are what give us the value of, help us realize the value of free software. Now, how do we realize these values? So I mentioned automation a few minutes back again. What does automation mean? If I'm going to log into a server and I'm going to run, say, 200 commands, copy a bunch of files, modify a lot of files, start or stop or restart certain services, there is no way of capturing what I have done. Hence, there is no way of capturing what it took to set up a system or deploy it or migrate it or maintain it, right? Automation is a simple technique by which we can capture these steps in form of source code. So by doing this, the act of deploying the software doesn't require that sort of expertise anymore. I might not have the expertise it takes to deploy it, but if it is packaged and there is a system to automate that packaging and deployment, I can deploy it on my own. And then if I learn to understand the automation system and the packaging system, I can even study it and learn from it, right? So automation today is not just for scale. When you have hundreds of things to manage, you use automation. It's not just that. Today, if I have to build even one server or one node or one desktop, I use automation because it gives me a way to share what I have done. It gives me a way for having others learn from what I have done. And it also gives me the confidence that I have an inventory of what all I have done. That there is nothing that I'm forgetting. There is no magic there, right? So if I can document everything into an automation system, then that further makes it easier for me to use the source code and to deploy it. So automation is also a form of documentation. Now, and a lot of times documentation is an afterthought. But there is a way to write documentation along with the source code. And this is something we can learn from the way free software communities work, right? When documentation is built to accompany the source code and not as an afterthought. Finally, communication. How do you communicate your intents? How do you communicate and document what you want to do? How do you build a bug tracking system which ties on to your source code and version control system? So again, communication techniques are unique to the way free software works, and that is something, if we understand, we can use that to our advantage, right? So that is about free software. Now, let me come back to reproducibility. The question that I want to ask, to which this is the answer, is this. First of all, if I give you a piece of software, can you build it yourself? Okay, you can build it. And if you built it, does it have the same results? Can you compare your results and your builds with somebody else's? Can you verify somebody else's build? Right? So what do I mean by a build? Let's say you have source code and you compile it. That source code might generate a binary, right? Or it might provide a web service, or it might implement a protocol or something like that. So that's a build. That specific collection of source code which runs together. Now, if I package that software and you packaged it, there should be a way to determine if the end result of our packaging is the same or not, right? And if it is, then that is a way of producing a reproducible build, right? The reason this is very important is because a lot of times, for example, think about people who manufacture wireless routers. A A lot of times they publish source code. But that source code is not equivalent to the firmware which is running on the device, or IP phone manufacturers, for example. They publish source code. They're required to do that under the terms of the GNU GPL. But that source code is of no use because it's not complete. It's not, if I compiled it in some way, it would not give me a binary equivalent of the software which is running on the device. So that's not a reproducible build. I cannot reproduce it, right? So reproducibility is also a way to achieve audit, to audit the software, right? Which means that I can give you a software which I say corresponds to the source code, but I could put a backdoor in that software. How do you verify it? If you know that the source code doesn't have a backdoor, then you can build that source code yourself, and you can compare the end result with what has been provided to you as an executable, and you can know that, yes, the software doesn't have a backdoor or something else, right? So this is a way to have deterministic outcomes. And that is why I feel reproducibility is very important. We don't focus enough on that in various aspects of software development, but it's very important. What is continuous integration? That's just a way of doing various things repeatedly and in an automated way. So how do you lower the time it takes from writing software to having that software provide some value to a user? But there is a long process for that. You have to test it, compile it, fix it, all those things. Continuous integration is a way to take source code to a user in the quickest possible manner and to automate that process. So if we automate that process, it encourages us to fix bugs faster. It encourages us to write software faster. It encourages us to, to deploy it faster. And because it's automated and because it can be done continuously, it also gives us the other things that we talked about, the reproducibility aspect and so on. Build competency, we talked a bit about it, but unless we are able to build our own skills, unless we are able to cultivate our own knowledge, we will not be able to audit and trust what we are getting into, what we are deploying. So I cannot repeat this often enough, and it is our duty as vendors or as service providers to help users do this, and it's also our responsibility as users to ask vendors to do this if we are using free software for any sort of implementation. Okay, so let me come to the last point about management. So a lot of times, we have a single vendor doing everything for us. And a lot of times I tell people to build what I call vendor pipelines. Can you get one person to do development, but somebody else to deploy it, and somebody else to maintain it? So when you build a pipeline of that sort, you are going to have clear communication, automation, packaging, documentation by default. If I'm doing everything, I have no reason to document things, I have no reason to communicate clearly or package things because I know everything, right? But if I'm going to get someone else to do it, then I have to institute a system for communication and documentation and packaging and testing and so on. So I think building vendor pipelines like we build pipelines on the command line is a very important concept so that we are sure that what is being developed is what is being implemented and what is the value of that is what is being provided to our users. Okay. This was a recent article in a magazine, but what I'm trying to, this is the headline they made from the discussion that I had, and the reason I'm sharing it is because I think freedom and self-reliance is really what we want. We don't want to be forced to depend on someone else. We don't want to depend on someone else out of compulsion. And free software can lead to that other extreme of self-reliance. So what I've tried to outline is how we can follow through this process using free software, right? So these are some of the thoughts that I had to share. Thank you so much, and it's been great to be able to participate in an event like this. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا للمتحدثين في هذه الجلسة. ندعو الآن الدكتور أحمد المعشري من كلية الهندسة بجامعة السلطان قابوس لإدارة الجلسة الحوارية الثانية مع الدكتور ناصر الزيدي والفاضل أبهاس أبنهاف والفاضل ماريو بولينغ والفاضلة دوروثي جوردن.
Great thanks to the speakers for their interesting talks. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ahmed Al-Ma'shari from College of Engineering at Sultan Qaboos University, to moderate the second panel discussion with Dr. Nasser Azidi, Mr. Abhas Abhinav, Mr. Mario Bailing, and Ms. Dorothy Gordon. المايكات هذا متحركة.
السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم. Do you like the show so far? Are you hungry? So the only thing between you and the lunch is this, right? So stick around. We'll not take too much of your time, and soon we'll be done. We're waiting for Abbas is here. What about Mario? He's not with us? Okay, so probably we can start. Before I start with the session, just a quick reminder that the innovative organizers of this conference, they came up with a nice way of ask questions. So if you go to the website, you can ask questions, and then, of course, it will be filtered out. We'll pick the nice ones, and then we'll ask guys here to answer your questions, okay? The first thing I will do here is ask the guys here to introduce themselves and probably give a brief bio about themselves. Dorothy?
Hello. Thank you. Can you hear me? My name's Dorothy Gordon. I'm currently the chair of the Intergovernmental Council of UNESCO's Information for All program. But prior to that, for about 13 years, I was the Director General of the Ghana-India Kofi Annan Center of Excellence in ICT. And we implemented a wholly open source system, both back-end and front-end. And it's really giving me a great pleasure to have the opportunity to interact with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Nasser?
Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm Nasser Azidi, and I'm actually an associate professor in computer science here in SKU. And currently I'm also running the Center for Information System, which is responsible for all IT services in SKU. That's it.
Abbas?
Yeah, my name's Abbas. I've been using free software for more than 20 years now, and I run a free software business called Deeproot, where we provide services to organizations who want to implement free software for a variety of purposes. I also run a small hardware company where my intention is to develop liberated hardware that will allow us to run free software. And I think that's one of the challenges that I see in today's world, where we don't have, we run too much proprietary software because the hardware we choose doesn't support free software. I'm also on the board of the Free Software Foundation of India, where I participate in various advocacy initiatives to create greater awareness about software freedom, not just the collaborative or what is called the open nature of the software, but the freedom aspect of free software as well. Thank you.
Okay, and Mario has just joined us. If you can introduce yourself and give a brief bio.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity here. And yeah, I have to say I'm very excited to be here. Yeah, I just met a lot of your students already here in the university, and yeah, we immediately got into discussions about technology and what we can do, and about our projects and how they can join. So I'm sorry to be late, because we were so much into the topic and already discussing what we can work on together that we missed the time. I'm so sorry, but like I think we're already achieving the goal of this conference, which is all about collaboration and opportunities for education, everything. About me, shortly, so I've lived many years in Asia, but I'm originally from Germany, from Berlin. And yeah, I'm one of the founders of FOSS Asia, which is a big community that we started in Asia. We have a lot of developers, over 3,000 registered on GitHub. We are making software projects, also hardware projects. And yeah, that's a bit about my background. And I was in many different countries. And yeah, now I'm here in Oman, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario. And just because you were late, you have to pay for lunch. For all of us.
Oh, okay. Yes, so I invite you to join us at the FOSS Asia Summit, and of course I will do that.
Thank you.
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Now, we started having questions. Just to make this a bit more organized, if you can precede your question with the name of the person you would like to ask. Example, Ahmed, what's your date of birth? Right? Answer, none of your business. Right? So please make sure when you ask this question, precede it with the name of the person you would like to ask. Before I take questions from the audience, I want to ask Abhas. So there was a study that was done 2015-2016 by SKU and ITA. And part of the study is to figure out what are the challenges faced by SMEs, small and medium enterprises. And it seems that there is an intent to adopt free open source as a business, but because of these challenges, numerous challenges, they refrain from adopting these, this is a model of business. Now, based on your experience in Deeproot and the software industry in India, what would be the secret recipe for a SME to adopt and to have an effective transfer of technology?
So the secret recipe would just be a firm intention. You know, if you're firm on this, then everything else, every other challenge that you perceive is something you will surmount by some means or the other. That's the way I look at it. Like, there was a customer where we implemented a server in 2001. They're still using it today, after close to 19 years, 18 years. And the reason is, the person who runs that company, though they're a small manufacturing unit, they manufacture auto parts, he just made a decision in 2001 that he wants to build everything in his office, in his manufacturing unit, using free software, right? Now, it's not that nothing has happened since 2001 till now, that new challenges haven't come up and new solutions haven't come up to existing and new problems, but he's very clear as to what he wants to do, and which is to use free software. Right? So, the way I look at it is, it's a creative process, right? Once you decide that that's how you want to do things, every challenge is a creative process. Now you have to, it's a lot of fun. How do I surmount this challenge? I've got a new situation where I have to figure out how to apply free software, which is what my decision is. I think that's the fun part. It's no fun if there were no challenges, right? So, when you talk about SMEs, I think there is at least one way in which everyone can use free software. And today, people pay too much attention to convenience and not enough to freedom and the ownership that they can get out of free software. And I think that is the thing that people have to reflect on. It's no one's business to tell someone else that you should forsake that convenience. But every one of us has to evaluate what is the price of having that convenience? And if we are forsaking security or privacy or freedom or opportunity to learn for that convenience. And it's especially relevant to students today. When I go and judge projects that students do, very unfortunately 90% of them are making choices with technology where they don't even run most of the software that the project uses on their own computer. And they don't even want to run a simple database on their own computer. Now, if that's the choice they have made, that's a shortcut they want to take, there is no way I can make free software appealing to them, right? So they have to remind themselves, look, we are supposed to be learning here by making a choice where we don't install, say, SQLite on our computer, we're not learning something, and hence that is what we should do, right? So that's my perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Abhas. I got a couple of questions to Nasser, more or less the same. Is the GIT hub the one you presented, is it open for the community? Is collaboration possible? If you can elaborate on that.
Thank you, Ahmed. We haven't opened it for the community. The local installation is for SKU currently. For our code, all source code versioning control solutions. However, probably I'm not. Well, everybody knows that in Oman here now we are running what's so-called the OMREN, the Oman Research and Education Network, where SQ is a key member, and the plan is actually to provide IT services over a high-speed network connecting different educational institutions in Oman. And it would be possible for SQ to open at least the GitHub repository for educational institutions. But currently, it's only for SQ.
Thank you, Nasser. I want to ask Dorothy a question. Are there any UNESCO programs, let's say especially for students and young professionals, which help them to facilitate free open source in bridging the gap and having an effective technology transfer? Are there any such programs?
Well, I think if you look at what UNESCO has done, and I always have to remind people that what the UN does is a result of what member states want the UN to do. And so you'll see that there are a number of declarations that have been made. There's a number of resource materials that are available online that can help people who are interested in doing so. And as Professor just said, there are research networks around the world that are using open source in educational context. In education, perhaps the most important is the fact that we now have a lot of serious attention being given to open education resources. And also, just last week, we had a declaration on the importance of source code, the retention, the preservation of source code as an international heritage that cannot be lost. I would like to comment a little bit on the question that you asked, because I have worked a lot on encouraging SMEs to get into open source. But when you talk about SMEs and open source, there are two angles. One is the SME which is providing open source solutions, and the other is the SME that is consuming open source solutions. And one of the aspects that has worked well is for the company that is actually an open source solution provider. They do not always tell their client that this is an open source solution. They look at the problem and then they say, I have a software that can help you solve this problem. And then we have online, for any students who want to become rich very quick, there are millions of resources, not millions, maybe thousands of resources explaining the different business models you can use to make money from open source. And the bottom line is, if you are operating a company that is selling open source solutions, you should have the same level of professionalism and customer care as any other company. And you must make sure that your client knows that they can count on you. And then it will be as you described. The client never wants to leave because you are actually providing value. So the most important thing is provide value. For me, that's the solution. The challenges we have, people don't understand it. Do not try to explain to somebody who doesn't even understand what software is the difference between proprietary and open. They will just think, don't go near him. We don't know what he's talking about. You know, I could go on and on this subject, but please just explore the business models that have been well documented for making money off open source. Do not have the impression that once it is open source, it means you should be hungry and starving. No.
Thank you, Dorothy. For some reason, Dr. Nasser is being hammered by questions, but I'll come back to you in a second. I want to ask Mario. Tomorrow you're going to give a talk, and it's about business opportunity, basically. And while I was going through the abstract, it seems that you have some experience in Afghanistan and even in Vietnam, right? Now, to me, once you have a business opportunity, that's basically will be an enabler. It's main driver for embracing the technology, localizing it, and even having effective transfer of that technology. Based on your experience in that part of the world, how can you relate to Oman? Do you see any similarities, any opportunities?
Okay, so, well, I'm not an expert on Oman, but of course you are, and yeah, I'm happy to share experiences that I've made. Yeah, I mean, like there are always opportunities, and I think when I look already here at the poster of the event, like I already see that you're looking at these opportunities here in Oman, and I'm sure like the big internet providers and technology companies here, they are using open source, because nowadays it's just not possible to not use open source. It's everywhere today, and the question is, how can we bring these opportunities also to like students and yeah, startups that can yeah, take part and take advantage of the code that is there already. And you already described a lot. Like what I can share from my personal experience is, like in Vietnam, we did mainly outsourcing, over several years for postal companies. So it was like entirely open for open source solutions, but you know, there are always like bits and pieces that need to be developed. And one obvious thing is that many open source applications don't support Arab languages, like Arab. And I'm personally like I know that there are even like different dialects, and I don't know how much they reflect. But yeah, I know this. For example, in Europe, I'm German, and we have Austrian German and Swiss German, and there are already differences. So the Arab world is much bigger, and so I think there are differences. So there are always opportunities for companies to support certain solutions in local languages and to develop ads and pieces that are necessary here. So for example, discussions that I had just now at FOSS Asia, we have an event system which is similar to Eventbrite, but also has the options for call for papers, call for speakers, and so on. And we don't support Arab yet, and also we don't support the local payment gateways. Yeah, as we discussed, like people need to learn, like have an income, and that could be interesting because I know that, for example, PayPal is not very well supported in Oman, and Eventbrite supports PayPal, but I think they don't support other payment gateways here. So we would even have an advantage over other proprietary systems that are not supporting here the local economy. Yeah, you can like use free and open source software, implement a local payment gateway, and you already have something that other systems don't have. And what do we get as, for example, the makers of the software? We get new contributors. We get another company. They earn income with us, with our system, and in return they contribute back to our system. So, and if all over the world small companies do that, we are much more powerful. And this is the power of collaboration. Yeah, like a traditional company is top down. They come from America or they come from Europe, and they say, here is our software, and you use it, and you have to pay for it. You want changes, you have to pay for it. But here you can do it yourself. You can develop your own abilities, and the technology transfer is a completely different technology transfer. It's not like from, like in the old times, 80s, 90s, how we said, yeah, here is a big company, and we come from Europe, and we give you a technology, and we share a bit of it, and now you learn from us. No, it's a technology transfer from all over the world to every other part of the world. It's completely on an equal basis. It's not like you come from one place of the world and you share it with you and you transfer the technology to you, but you actually, everyone contributes and we all share technology. It's much better feeling, yeah? as if you come like even for the person, like in the old sense, come from Europe and say, here's our technology. It's a bit like, you know, it feels much better if you can work on an equal basis. And this is really what I love about open source. And we have many examples that I hope to share here in future, where we actually, for example, had like contributors from India, and they shared the Pocket Science Lab original design with us, and then other people came on board. It's really a beautiful story. And I hope we will see more of this by collaborating here in Oman.
Thank you very much, Mario. Question to Nasser from the audience, Saeed Abdussalam. We have been talking about the benefits of applying free and open source software for years. However, it seems that most governmental bodies are still reluctant to adopt this idea. How can this problem be solved?
It's a very big question. Right. So I think I've mentioned some success factors that I believe, if we look at them, would probably ease this issue a little bit. Before I go into some of the success factors that I would like to mention, I just would like to refer everybody to a study which was done by the SKU and ITA back in the 2015. Ahmed was, I think, a principal investigator into that study along with the ITA, and I believe that study highlighted a lot of things that could be adopted to speed up the adoption of free and open source software in the government. And I believe there was a roadmap. So the complete answer to this is probably available into that study. I just would like to highlight the experiment that we did here in SKU. I believe one of the things is that engaging different stakeholders on board from day zero is very important, and that applies to top management, that applies to your technical team, and that applies even to end users. And you have to talk to each one of these with the language they understand and with the issues that they care most about. So when you have to present this to top management, you have to talk about business continuity, you have to talk about cost, you have to present a very solid business case that would get you the support. If you talk to technical teams, then you need to make sure well, this move, for example, is good for building your capacity, for making you more competent into the field, and same thing goes to the end users. So engaging end users, I think, is very, very key reason. The points mentioned by my friend in the previous talk, I think is very crucial as well. So when it comes to adapting software, you have to adapt the principles of software before you go and select a software solution. Openness is very important, and that basically means, as he mentioned, you cannot expect an open source software solution to fly and you are not sharing the source code. I mean, you are just neglecting the entire idea of open and open source software. So I guess these are the two key main success factors that should be looked at. And again, I would like to refer the audience to the study Ahmed mentioned. I think it contains a lot of details.
Quick correction, I was not the principal investigator. The PI was Professor Halberdusen. I was one of the investigators.
Right. So you are one of the investigators. So
one of them. Question to Abhas, and if you can answer it in 1 minute because we're really pressured in time. Abhas, what is the best way to convey to the top management to use the open source software? I think more or less relevant to the question that he was answering.
Well, I don't know of one way that would apply to every situation. So my general way of looking at it is you have to find one thing they want to achieve by using some software for that, solving that problem, and then find a way to bring free software as a way of doing that implementation. So what is the problem that I'm trying to solve? Okay, first that's the main question. Now to solve that problem, I'm trying to build software or procure service from someone. Now, if you evaluate what choices you have, you will find the pros and cons for that, and then you will understand what are the advantages that free software can provide against all other options, right? So then if the advantages that free software provides are more convincing than that of something else, and I'm sure people, so it's also like you have to understand that every decision is not reasonable all the time. And if every decision was reasonable, I don't see why everyone would not be using free software, right? So there are other challenges, people might not understand. You could give the best argument, but someone might not be receptive to it, right? So there is no way to answer this because there are too many factors which are outside your control. But what I can say to someone who is trying to pitch to their management is that they should not stop pitching it. They might not get success very quickly, but if they stop pitching, then they will definitely not get success. So they have to keep giving the same message to their management in different ways. And that way, they will also improve their arguments. They would also find and observe what things they look at when they make their choices, and then they would be able to use that in their favor, in their arguments. So we should not stop talking just because people are not listening.
Thank you for that answer. Last question, because we're really late and we need to go for lunch. Probably this question should be shared between Mario and Dorothy. Maybe each one of you can give a minute of your time to give your own perspective. Although, this is by Ahmed Al-Hajri, although open source solutions offer great opportunities, but to learn how to use or customize a solution is quite time consuming. Or finding a pro developer is not easy. How we can get through this?
So actually, yeah, what's easy in life? I don't know, like you want to go learn, like speak another language, you have to learn it. You have to, you want to, yeah, install a system, develop a system, well, you have to learn it. If not, you pay somebody else to do it. I mean, yeah, so yeah, that's my short answer. I mean, like I always like the example of the hairdresser. Yeah, actually cutting hair is maybe easy, but maybe I would prefer to go to a real hairdresser. Some people pay really a lot for hairdressers, so there is a difference. Yeah, I mean, to be a good hairdresser is difficult, so you also pay for it. To install software and so on is difficult, but like I would add the point of short-term versus long-term. So if you want sometimes a short-term solution, maybe there's even proprietary systems that give you something for free. But if you have actually the goal of having a big company, or maybe you have a big company, maybe you look at it, nothing is really for free. If you want free and open source, it has actually long-term advantages. That you can implement your own add-ons, or you don't have a vendor lock-in. You don't depend on one vendor. You can choose different vendors and can go to somebody else if you don't like the quality, or if it's too expensive. So this is an important point. I would like to add the short-term versus long-term.
Okay. Dorothy, your take?
I think that you've made a good point about the short-term versus the long-term. I want to also remind people of the national strategic value of it. When you depend on external software, you introduce a new security vulnerability nationally. It means that your critical national infrastructure is dependent on software that perhaps you have no ability to understand, no ability to unpack. In this day and age where we see that cyber attacks become part of cyber warfare, well, general warfare, it isn't really advisable to have that level of vulnerability. And let me also add that there is no business that is going to pick up a software and implement it without some level of customization, whether it is open source or whether it is proprietary. If for your business, you will have to customize to some level. And it's better that you understand what has been customized, and you understand when you will need to re-customize, and you will have that ability to do it internally, rather than being dependent on the external. So I think that Sometimes we need to take the conversation away from the firm level and start looking at it from a national level. Is this where we want to be? Do we want to be totally dependent on external technology, whether it's coming out of Silicon Valley or it's coming out of the Chinese equivalent? Do we want to be dependent?
Thank you. And I think that basically concludes the session. I would like to thank Mario, Dorothy, Nasser, and Abhas for answering the questions. And I would like also to ask the audience for asking these questions. That's it for today, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Shukran.
من شارك معنا في جلسات المؤتمر في يومه الأول، ونأمل أنها كانت مفيدة للجميع، وندعوكم الآن لتناول وجبة الغداء في القاعة الملحقة بنادي أعضاء هيئة التدريس. وأود التذكير بأنه في تمام الساعة 3 ستكون هنالك جلسة لتقديم الأوراق العلمية في مختبر البرمجيات الحرة والمفتوحة المصدر.
At the end of this day, I would like to thank all of you for participating with us today. And I hope you all enjoyed today's session. And please join us and have lunch at the Annex Hall at the building of the Faculty Club. I would like to draw your attention to the technical presentation session at the FOSS lab that will start at 3 p.m. Thank you again.